Welcome to this deep dive into ambiguity in language.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, this is something that we've been wanting to get to for a while.
Yeah.
Is it good? Is it bad?
Right.
Is it helpful or
Yeah.
hurtful?
Mm-hmm.
And luckily for us, we've got some really smart people to help us out with this.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking at stuff from William Lycan,
Okay.
Noam Chomsky,
Uh-huh.
W.V.O. Quine.
Big names.
Those are some big names in the
Yeah.
philosophy of language.
Yeah.
But we're also going to be looking at some stuff from Jeffrey Leach,
Okay.
who does a lot of work in sociolinguistics.
That's a cool angle.
Yeah, thinking about how politeness shapes the way that we use language.
Interesting.
And then also we've got a Semantics book by Kearns.
All right.
So we'll be able to kind of break down the different types of ambiguity.
I like it.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
So it's interesting, to think about how all these different perspectives
Yeah.
kind of circle back to this fundamental question of, what is meaning? Before we can even talk about ambiguity,
Yeah.
we have to grapple with, how does meaning itself even work?
Yeah, because if we don't even know what one meaning of a word is,
Exactly.
how can we talk about having multiple meanings for that word?
Exactly.
So yeah, that seems like a pretty good place to start.
Yeah, definitely. And, one thinker who really wrestled with this was Quine.
Okay.
And he had this idea of stimulus meaning.
Stimulus meaning.
Yeah, so basically the idea is that, the meaning of a word
Mm-hmm.
is tied to the stimuli that would cause someone to use that word.
Okay, so if I see a piece of cake and I say cake,
Exactly.
that's what's giving the word cake its meaning.
Right, that connection between, the thing in the world and the word that you utter.
Yeah.
But Quine takes this idea even further with this, really mind-bending thought experiment
Okay.
called radical translation.
Radical translation.
Yeah, have you ever heard of this?
I'm not sure.
So imagine you're trying to learn a completely alien language. You've landed on a new planet, and you have no dictionaries, no translators.
Right.
All you can do is observe how the native speakers react to different stimuli.
Oh, that sounds tough.
Right, and this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
So Quine uses this example of the word gavagai.
Gavagai.
Yeah, so let's say a native speaker points at a rabbit and says gavagai.
Okay.
Does that mean a rabbit?
Right.
Could it mean undetached rabbit part?
Oh.
Maybe it means look food.
Nice.
The point is, it's incredibly difficult to pin down meaning,
Yeah.
even with direct observation.
Wow, that Gavagai example really kind of blows my mind.
Yeah.
Because it makes you realize that even something as basic as just naming an object can have all this ambiguity kind of baked in from the very beginning.
Yeah. It's a real challenge to traditional ideas about meaning.
Yeah.
Do words actually have fixed definitions?
Right.
Or is it all just a matter of our interpretation? And, if even basic words are slippery like that, then what happens when we start dealing with phrases, sentences?
Right.
More complex ideas.
Right. And that's where ambiguity comes in.
Exactly. Ambiguity is basically when a single word or phrase has multiple possible interpretations.
Okay. But it sounds like there are different types of ambiguity.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And Kearns does a great job of breaking this down in her book.
Okay.
She distinguishes between lexical ambiguity, which is about words with multiple meanings,
Okay.
and syntactic ambiguity, which comes from the structure of the sentence.
Could you give us some examples?
Sure. So a classic example of lexical ambiguity is the word bank.
Right.
It could refer to a financial institution or the edge of a river.
Okay, two totally different things.
Exactly. And then for syntactic ambiguity, think about the sentence. Visiting relatives can be boring.
Okay.
Is it the relatives who are boring, or is it the act of visiting them?
Ooh, I see.
The structure of the sentence leaves it open to interpretation.
So in the first case, it's the word itself that's ambiguous.
Right.
And in the second case, it's the way the words are arranged.
Exactly. And Kearns makes a further distinction within lexical ambiguity.
Oh, there's more.
Yeah, between polysemy and full-blown ambiguity.
Polysemy.
Yeah, so polysemy is when a word has related meanings.
Okay.
Like the different senses of fork.
Okay.
The utensil for eating a tool in the garden,
Yeah.
a branch splitting in a road.
Okay.
So it's like a family of meanings with a
Yeah.
shared root.
Okay.
Full-blown ambiguity, on the other hand,
Mm-hmm.
involves words with completely unrelated meanings.
Like bank again.
Exactly. Like bank, the financial institution, and the river bank.
Right.
Totally different concepts.
Yeah. Okay. So now that we've kind of got a handle on the different types of ambiguity,
Uh-huh.
the big question is this a design flaw in language?
Right.
Is it a glitch?
Yeah.
Or is it actually a feature that we can use to our advantage?
Now we're getting to the heart of it. And to tackle this, we need to turn to one of the titans of linguistics,
Okay.
Noam Chomsky.
Chomsky.
He argues that language is way more complex
Okay.
than just like surface level meanings.
Mm-hmm.
There's a deeper level of structure at play.
Okay, so there's like more to it than meets the eye.
Precisely. Chomsky distinguishes between the surface structure of a sentence,
Okay.
which is like what we actually hear or read,
Right.
and the deep structure, which represents the underlying meaning.
So even if a sentence is ambiguous, like on the surface level,
Yeah.
our brains are good at figuring out what it really means
Yeah.
based on this deeper structure.
Based on that deeper structure and all the context.
Okay.
So Chomsky gives this example to illustrate this.
Yeah.
The sentence, John is easy to please,
Okay.
seems straightforward enough, right?
Right.
But then he compares it to its nominalization.
Nominalization.
Yes. It's just a fancy word for turning a verb or adjective into a noun.
Okay.
So like turning the verb run into the noun runner.
Okay, I get it.
So the nominalization of John is easy to please would be John's easiness to please.
Okay.
So very different surface structures,
All right.
but they both point to the same underlying meaning.
Okay.
And that's where Chomsky's insight gets really interesting.
Ugh.
He's suggesting that ambiguity isn't always a problem
Okay.
because our brains are wired to cut through that surface confusion and
Right.
access that deeper level of meaning.
So our brains are like linguistic detectives.
I like that.
Yeah.
Solving these little mysteries all the time.
Constantly.
So yeah, ambiguity isn't necessarily a flaw in the system, but rather a consequence of the incredible efficiency and flexibility of human language.
So we can express these really complex ideas,
Uh-huh.
but it means that sometimes a little bit of ambiguity is going to sneak in.
A little bit of ambiguity is going to sneak in, but that doesn't mean it's always harmless.
Right.
There are definitely situations where it can lead to genuine misunderstandings.
Right, so like in a legal document?
Exactly.
Or like a scientific paper?
Yeah, where precision is absolutely crucial.
Yeah.
And that's where the social context of language becomes super important.
Okay.
And this is something that Jeffrey Leach explores in his work.
Oh, right. This is the book that talks about cultures,
Yeah.
where politeness is so complex.
Yes.
You can't even talk about the weather without like stepping on someone's toes.
That's the one.
Yeah.
So Leach argues that politeness often involves strategic ambiguity.
Strategic ambiguity.
Yeah.
Okay.
We use indirect language hedges and other strategies to soften the blow of requests or disagreements.
So instead of saying, turn down that music, it's too loud,
Right.
you would say something like, would you mind maybe turning the music down a little bit?
Exactly.
It's a little bit hard to concentrate.
Yeah, much more diplomatic.
Right. So by being ambiguous, you're being polite.
Exactly. You can be polite without sacrificing the meaning.
Okay.
And it's not just about avoiding negative interactions.
Right.
Ambiguity can also be used for humor,
Okay.
wordplay, artistic expression. Think about poetry and song lyrics,
Right.
where multiple layers of meaning add depth and richness.
Yeah, and it makes you think about those different interpretations long after you've finished reading or listening.
Yeah, exactly. And that brings us full circle to Quin
Yeah.
and his ideas about the connection between language and thought.
Okay.
Remember how he was skeptical about traditional ideas of meaning?
Yeah.
Well, he took that skepticism a step further and questioned whether we can even think clearly without clear language.
Wait, are you saying our thoughts themselves can be ambiguous?
That's exactly what Quin was suggesting.
Wow.
He argued that ambiguity might not be just a linguistic problem,
Okay.
but a reflection of the inherent ambiguity of thought itself.
This is getting really deep.
It is.
Yeah.
But I think it's a good place to pause for now
Okay.
and let our listeners kind of digest this first layer of the ambiguity puzzle
Yeah.
before we dive even deeper.
Okay. Sounds good.
You know, it's funny when we talk about these big theories
Yeah.
of meaning and ambiguity,
Mm.
but like in our everyday lives,
Right.
we encounter ambiguity all the time.
Right.
And we're usually pretty good at just like resolving it
Yeah.
without even thinking about it.
Exactly. If someone says, I went to the bank,
Right.
I don't usually think, oh, did they go to a river or did they go to a place to get money?
Exactly.
The context usually makes it pretty clear.
The context makes it clear our brains are amazing
Yeah.
at picking up on those cues.
Yeah.
Like the speaker's tone of voice, our shared background knowledge.
Right.
It all helps us disambiguate.
Right.
So even though Language itself can be ambiguous. The way we use language is actually incredibly nuanced
Right.
and sophisticated.
So we're not just like robots, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Hoping that someone will understand us.
We're strategic
Right.
about how we communicate.
Yeah. And sometimes that means using ambiguity to our advantage.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about politeness.
Yeah.
What are some other ways that we can use ambiguity effectively?
Well, one area where ambiguity really shines is humor.
Okay.
Think about puns, double entendres.
Oh, yeah.
All those clever ways that we play with words
Right.
to get a laugh.
I love puns.
Me too.
They're so fun.
It's like that little mental spark when
Yeah.
you get the joke.
Exactly.
And that spark often comes from the fact
Yeah.
that the word or phrase has multiple interpretations.
Right.
And like the unexpected shift between those interpretations.
Right.
That's what makes it.
Okay, so ambiguity can be a source of joy and connection.
Absolutely.
Not just confusion and misunderstanding.
Not just confusion.
Okay.
It can create surprise creativity.
Yeah.
Even a sense of like shared understanding
Right.
when you and someone else both get the joke.
Totally. Okay, so we've talked about humor.
Uh-huh.
What about some more serious uses of ambiguity?
Ooh, yeah.
Like, are there places where it's used intentionally for like a specific purpose?
Definitely think about diplomacy, for example,
Okay.
in international relations,
Mm.
where the stakes are super high.
Right.
Ambiguous language can be a valuable tool.
So like using vague language to avoid making concrete commitments.
That's one strategy.
Okay.
It can also be a way to signal multiple messages at the same time,
Oh,
appealing to different audiences
What do
without
they-
directly contradicting yourself.
oh, that's clever.
Right.
It's like a linguistic sleight of hand.
I like that.
Yeah.
It's like you're guiding attention, not revealing all your cards.
Right.
And that strategic vagueness
Yeah.
can be really important for keeping negotiations on track.
Okay.
Or finding common ground between parties
Right.
who have very different views.
So ambiguity can be an asset
It can be.
in those high stakes scenarios.
It definitely can be.
But I imagine there's a fine line
Oh, yeah.
between being strategically vague
Right.
and just being so unclear
Totally.
that you confuse everyone.
It's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of skill and
Yeah.
understanding of the situation.
Right. Like you could really misjudge things
You could.
and you could blow up in your face.
Exactly. It's not about being intentionally deceptive.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that language is powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And ambiguity can be one of those tools,
Yeah.
if used thoughtfully,
Right.
can help you achieve your goals,
Right.
whether that's making someone laugh,
Mm-hmm.
navigating a diplomatic impasse,
Right.
or crafting a piece of writing
Yeah.
that resonates on multiple levels.
Okay. This is making me think back to Kearns' distinction
Uh,
between polysemy
yeah,
and full-blown ambiguity.
right.
Does that play a role in how we use ambiguity strategically?
That's a great question. I think it does.
Okay.
You know, when we use ambiguity for humor or for creative purposes,
Right.
we often rely on polysemy.
Okay.
Those words with multiple related meanings.
Right.
And that connection between those meanings
Yeah.
is what creates the wordplay. The aha moment.
Like if you say someone is bright, you could mean they're intelligent,
Right.
or you could mean like a light.
Exactly.
It's really bright,
Exactly.
but it's that connection
Yes.
that makes it funny.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
But when it comes to strategic ambiguity
Uh-huh.
in diplomacy or other serious contexts,
Right.
I think we often rely on full-blown ambiguity,
Okay.
words with completely unrelated meanings,
Okay.
because that allows for
Yeah.
a much wider range of interpretations,
Like
which can be useful when you need to be flexible
Okay.
or avoid making those firm commitments.
So like if you're a diplomat
Right.
trying to negotiate a peace treaty,
Uh-huh.
you might use a word like settlement,
Yeah,
which could refer to like a physical place
exactly.
or like a financial agreement.
Exactly. And both sides can kind of walk away feeling like they got what they wanted,
Right.
even if their interpretations are a little different.
Even if they're thinking different things
Exactly.
when they hear the word.
It's a way to create that win-win situation,
Yeah.
at least on the surface,
Right.
which can be crucial in those really delicate situations.
This is all so fascinating,
Yeah.
but I feel like we're only scratching the surface.
Oh, we are.
Is there anything else we should touch on before we wrap up?
There's one final point I think is worth highlighting,
Okay.
and it goes back to Quin's idea
Okay.
about the link between language and thought.
You mean the idea that our thoughts themselves can be ambiguous?
Exactly.
Okay.
So often when we talk about ambiguity, we focus on like the words and sentences themselves.
Right, like the surface level?
The surface level of language.
Okay.
But what's even more interesting, I think, is what this reveals about how our minds work.
So you're saying the ambiguity in language might be like a clue
It might be a clue.
to a deeper ambiguity in the way we think.
Exactly.
Like,
And this is where things get really interesting.
yeah.
Because it challenges some of our basic assumptions about how our minds work.
Like the idea that we're always rational,
Yeah.
that our thoughts are always clear,
Precisely.
that we know exactly what we mean when
Well,
we're thinking something.
And this is a conversation that could go on for hours.
Yeah, it really could.
But I think for now,
Yeah.
it's a good point to pause
Okay.
and let you, our listener, ponder the implications of what we've discussed.
So if our thoughts can be ambiguous too,
Yeah.
then how do we ever really understand each other?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And, as we've been talking about, context is key.
Okay.
The situation, the relationship between speakers,
Right.
their shared background, all of these things help us to figure out what's really meant.
It kind of reminds me of those optical illusions.
Oh, yeah.
Where you see one thing and then suddenly your brain flips it.
It flips.
And you see something totally different.
Totally a different image.
But it's the same lines on the page.
It's the same image, just a different way of seeing it.
Exactly.
And sometimes we need that little push
Yeah.
to shift our perspective,
Well,
see things in a new way.
And that's where like nonverbal cues come in.
Right.
And just asking for clarification.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, if I'm talking to someone and I'm feeling a little bit lost,
Yeah.
it's okay to just be like, wait, what do you mean?
Absolutely.
Or can you rephrase that?
Yeah, communication is a two-way street.
Mhm.
It's totally fine to acknowledge the ambiguity
Yeah.
and work together to clear it up.
Yeah, we put so much pressure on ourselves
I know.
to like pretend we understand everything perfectly,
Right.
but just admitting that we're confused
Yeah.
can actually help
Can help a lot.
to build stronger connections with people.
Absolutely. And it's not just about clearing up misunderstandings
Okay.
in the moment.
Right.
It's also about building a shared understanding
Okay.
over time.
Right.
The more you communicate with someone,
Mhm.
the more you learn about how they use language,
Right.
what their little quirks are. And that
Yeah.
helps you anticipate and
Right.
resolve ambiguity more effectively in the future.
So like relationships are really important
Relationships are huge.
for navigating ambiguity.
Huge for ambiguity. Think about like inside jokes, nicknames,
Right.
those little shorthand ways of communicating
Right.
that only make sense within a particular relationship.
Right.
They're built on that shared history
Right.
of understanding.
Yeah. And it makes me think about like different communities or subcultures
Right.
that develop their own slang
That's
or
right.
jargon.
Yeah.
That might sound totally bizarre to someone who's not part of that group.
Like a secret code.
Yeah.
But within that group, it creates this like sense of belonging
Right.
and shared identity.
So language isn't just about conveying information.
It's so much more than that.
It's about connecting with people,
Yeah.
expressing yourself,
Right.
creating a shared reality,
Yeah.
building relationships.
So embracing ambiguity isn't just about being a better communicator
Right.
in a practical sense. It's also about like appreciating
Yes.
the beauty
The beauty.
and the complexity of language.
Absolutely.
Wow, this has been such a great deep dive.
It has.
I feel like I've learned so much.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, I'm really starting to appreciate ambiguity in a whole new way.
I hope so.
Yeah. So to our listeners out there,
Yes.
keep your ears open.
Keep your ears open.
Your minds engaged.
Stay curious.
And remember,
Yes.
sometimes a little ambiguity
A little ambiguity.
can be a beautiful thing.
It can be beautiful.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.